Chapter 1461 Extra, Deng Shintong I. 2.5 years after the end of the world. Blizzard City had finally solved its energy crisis, and the yuan ore that Zhang Yi had brought back had revitalized this steel and concrete jungle. But the tough and grim environment of the outside world had not completely changed. Humans are still faced with all kinds of threats at all times. The powerful mutant beasts, the wandering mutants who did not submit to the management of Blizzard City, and everything that only a few people in this world knew about, powerful and secretive. Deng's technology. In the middle of the underground laboratory, the researchers in white coats were busy at this time. The person in charge, Deng Mao, looked at the transparent workbench in front of him, on which the structural diagram of the humanoid emerged, as well as various dynamic data. He raised his head and looked through the transparent glass window at the handsome topless man in the lab. Deng Shintong was wearing only a pair of white lab pants, his muscular and solid upper body did not have a single scar, and his perfect muscular lines made him look as if he was a work of art under the hands of a master sculptor. He stood inside a cylindrical, semi-transparent experimental chamber, which was connected to a dozen thick and long pipes. "Begin," Deng Mao said in a deep voice. The experimenter next to him immediately operated the console. Soon, a reddish-colored electric current surged into the experimental chamber along with the dozen or so pipes, stimulating Deng Shintong's body to spasm. He clenched his fists, couldn't help but raise his chin, and let out a painful groan from his mouth. This kind of experiment, even as a captain-level mutant with an ability index of 9,700, there was no way he could easily withstand it. Powerful forces poured into the chamber, causing the entire chamber to flash with a serpentine arc of electricity that finally surged into Deng Shintong's body. His muscles rose and fell as if he was breathing in this powerful energy. Even his pupils began to glow with a demonic red light. After a long time, Deng Mao looked at the exclamation mark on the monitor that already suggested saturation before ordering for the experiment to stop. "Professor, this is the data from this experiment." The researcher next to him quickly organized the data and handed it to Deng Mao's hands. Deng Mao looked at the data and couldn't help but frown. How come it's still this result? Just at this time, a large white hand poked through from the side and picked up the experimental data. Deng Mao twisted his head to see that Deng Yuanbo was carefully surveying the data above. "Great uncle." Deng Mao hurriedly hung his head and saluted, a hint of nervousness and guilt on his face. Deng Yuanbo looked at the data and just lightly said to him, "There's no need to be nervous, you guys have done your best. There's nothing wrong with our experiment, this is something I can feel from him." He put down the data in his hand and looked towards Deng Shintong, who was sitting in the experiment chamber with his head bowed, his long silver hair covering his handsome cheeks. This high-intensity energy infusion experiment had brought him a strong physical load. But likewise, the gains were incomparably great. It's not the energy infusion that he lacks. Perhaps from the very beginning, there was a problem with our understanding. Deng Yuanbo gazed at his nephew, who had high hopes, and said indifferently. Deng Mao was somewhat surprised, but our technology is already at the current world-class level. Even the Ministry of Scientific Research there may not be as advanced as us. Deng Yuanbo carried his hands behind his back. Humans know very little about their own situation, and it was only after the arrival of the end times that the world began to study human mutation technology on a large scale. Even being at the forefront of the world may not mean anything. He turned around and walked towards the outside. "Stop the experiments for now, what he needs is not this thing. After his rest is over, have him come over to see me." 1 hour later. Deng Shintong, clad in a silver-colored outer robe, arrived at the Deng family's back garden and found Deng Yuanbo, who was feeding the ferrets. "Uncle. I'm sorry, I failed again," Deng Shintong said in a low voice, his eyes lowered, somewhat guilty and at the same time somewhat bewildered. Deng Yuanbo just looked at him with a calm gaze before saying, "Don't stay in Blizzard City." Deng Shintong raised his head and looked at Deng Yuanbo. "Eldest uncle, You mean you want me to go out and train? Deng Yuanbo casually threw the food in his palm to the expectant ferret in front of him, clapped his hands, and said, "The technical department now rates your ability at 9,700 points. This number hasn't changed in any way for a few months now. Yet, I feel that you already possess potential that is close to Epsilon. All you lack from Epsilon is a key. It is pointless to continue the energizing process." But before that, he walked over and reached out to pat Deng Shintong on the shoulder, looking at him with a calm gaze. "There is something you must first understand." Deng Shintong frowned, his eyes somewhat incomprehensible. "What do you wish me to figure out?" Deng Yuanbo smiled faintly. "You need to know exactly why you are getting stronger. A person will only move forward with certainty without any hesitation when they have a clear goal. But the current you, do you know exactly what you want?" Deng Shintong's heart was shocked at his words. "Of course I know. What I want is to become stronger." He clenched his fists. Getting stronger was his greatest expectation nowadays. He was the heir of the Deng Group, holding the most powerful technological and financial group in the Jiangnan region. At the beginning of the arrival of the end times, he used to be the pride of heaven that everyone in the entire Jiangnan region favored, and was even considered to be the strongest contender for the next supreme commander. But since when did his reputation begin to fade and he was no longer held in high regard? It was from the time the Eclipse Moon organization invaded the Jiangnan region. And after losing a head-to-head duel with Gao Changkong, it completely reduced him to a second-rate character. No one was really willing to be a supporting role for others, let alone a proud and prominent figure like Deng Shintong. So all along, he had been desperately trying to become stronger. He only hoped that sooner or later, he would be able to catch up with Zhang Yi or even surpass him. Deng Yuanbo shook his head. "What I'm asking you is, what are you getting stronger for?" Deng Shintong almost blurted out, in order to make himself surpass Zhang Yi and be re-recognized by everyone. But when the words came out, he was suddenly a bit confused. Was it really what he wanted? It seemed to be important, and then again, it didn't seem to be that important. Striving to become stronger just for the sake of fame did not seem to be a strong driving force. For a time, his eyes appeared blank with bewilderment. Deng Yuanbo gazed at him and said slowly, "For so many years, you have been living too comfortably. Teng's technology has given you the best technology and ample protection. Born in worry and dying in peace, although such protection allowed you to go smoothly, it also curbed your ability to move forward on your own. When you have something to rely on in your heart, you will subconsciously choose to rely on others rather than yourself." Chapter 1462 Extra, Deng Shintong 2. Deng Yuanbo mentioned someone as he spoke. "So, that's why Zhang Yi was able to grow at an astonishing speed. Because he doesn't have the same conditions as you, he survives in the midst of a crisis at all times and must constantly make himself stronger. Survival is the #1 driving force." Nothing stimulated Deng Shintong more than Zhang Yi's name. Others might not know that Deng Shintong had always considered Zhang Yi as the goal he was striving for. Even though to this day, this goal had become more and more distant from him, he had never given up. Deng Shintong's eyes gradually became clear from blankness. He looked into Deng Yuanbo's eyes. "Eldest uncle, are you saying that you want me to be like Zhang Yi and live towards death?" Deng Yuanbo nodded. Then, he passed a piece of information to Deng Shintong. "I've taken on a level A mission for you. This time, you're going to complete it alone." Blizzard City's mission, nowadays, level A was already the highest level. Because of the S-level terrorist calamity, only Zhang Yi was qualified to carry it out. Captain-level mutants below Epsilon performed the highest level A missions. In the past, Deng Shintong had always led his team, fully loaded and ready to go out on a mission. This time, however, Deng Yuanbo asked him to go out alone. The purpose was to get him out of his comfort zone and try to go through the wind and snow alone. Deng Shintong glanced at the information and nodded without the slightest hesitation. "All right, I'll go." He left Deng Yuanbo with a determined look before turning to leave. Deng Yuanbo looked at Deng Shentong's back, and a complex color emerged among his eyes. Some worry, as well as a lot of anticipation. Butler Liancheng walked over and asked softly, "Master, should we send someone to secretly follow and protect young master?" Deng Yuanbo slowly shook his head. "He has grown up, and it is time for me to let go." Liancheng frowned slightly, but, O-level missions, even if a captain level goes alone to carry them out, it is still equally very dangerous. Mutants were not invincible. The outside world, which had long been frozen, was inconvenient for transportation. Apart from a small number of top mutants and teams, mutants below Epsilon or low-level teams organized to travel could easily encounter danger. Even a sudden snowstorm could potentially destroy a small team of fully equipped soldiers. Not everyone was Zhang Yi, and the crisis of the end times would only become more brutal in the world outside of Blizzard City. Deng Yuanbo said, "If he wants to become the helmsman of the Deng family and take over my position, he must become stronger. In this world full of crises, the Tang clan needs to have its own top mutant." There were also words that he held in his heart and did not say. If Deng Shentong really died due to his lack of strength, then, even with his grief, he must pick a new successor. Everything was for the continuation of the Tang clan under the Doomsday. Deng Shentong returned to his residence. He went to the equipment storehouse and the heavy metal doors slowly rose. "Jasmine, I'm going out on a mission alone. Prepare the armament for me." Option 7. The lights in the equipment vault click. 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 The lights came on, and the luxurious equipment in front of the eyes could literally blind people. A transformed luxury snowmobile was quietly lined up on both sides, and on the walls, all kinds of firearms, swords and throwing weapons were in abundance. In the exhibition cabinet made of bulletproof glass, all kinds of special props made by Deng's highest-end technology, even Zhang Yi would be deeply shocked by its whimsicality when he saw them. The gentle voice of the intelligent system Jasmine rang out. "Received, the best arming program has been prepared for you according to your next mission." An engine roared from the arsenal, and then a silver-gray snowmobile drove directly in front of Deng Shentong. Its skeleton was low, like a wild silver beast, and its sloppy tires had deep teeth marks, allowing it to run extremely fast in the snow and grip the ground extremely well without skidding. This was one of Deng Shentong's vehicles, the Snow Metro Wolf. Deng Shentong patted the silver beast, and then a mechanical arm handed over the arming kit, which housed all kinds of military food and medicines and props necessary for traveling missions. For weapons, he chose a pair of large silver-gray pistols tattooed with zinnias, in addition to 100 rounds of special origin bullets. After checking over the equipment, Deng Shentong placed them in the trunk of the Iron Wolf. Draped in the combat uniform and silver cloak that symbolized the identity of the Heavenly God Squad captain, he piloted the Iron Wolf and left the Tang family home, passing through the thick alloy doorways of Blizzard City and heading towards the boundless wilderness in the distance. This world did not become peaceful because of the appearance of the mutants, but instead became more dangerous. Because after everyone has the possibility to get strong strength, the inner desires will also be infinitely enlarged. With the arrival of the Great Mutation era, the appearance of mutants also became more and more frequent. Even Blizzard City was slowly losing control of the region. They were unable to restrain all the mutants within the region, and an unknown number of unsubordinate existed either as lone wolves or in gangs. And they became the root cause of some of the scourges in the Jiangnan region. For the investigation team, cleaning up those unsubordinates that would cause trouble was one of their daily tasks. The vast and boundless ice field, all the buildings and jungles in the past were buried by the snow, and 2.5 years after the end of the world, the thickness of the snow had already exceeded 30 meters. It wasn't even uncommon to see ice and snow piles of up to 50 meters high in some of the less traveled areas. The traces of human existence were erased little by little in the wilderness. Most of the humans would not easily leave their fixed nests, as the lack of resources and low temperatures in the outside world could kill them at any time. However, the teams of the great powers were an exception. They had long had the ability to transport themselves through the icy landscape. A long steel train traveled like a long black dragon in the middle of the snow, and around the train, there were a dozen or so snowmobiles closely escorting it. This kind of vehicle that specialized in running in the snow had already been developed after the end of the world. Although it seems to be huge, in fact, it is already maximized to reduce its weight, and completely drive the body to run in the way of tracks. The vehicles of the guards were of a uniform style, with a black cloud logo on their bodies, symbolizing their identity, the Yan Yunwei of the Jiangnan region. Some of the unsubservient people who secretly intended to loot would silently choose to retreat after seeing this symbol. This was because once the convoy escorted by the Yan Yunwei was plundered, then shortly afterward, it would surely usher in a bloodbath from the investigation force. However, this time, there were still some ungrateful people who appeared. On top of the snowy mountains in the distance, the heads of individuals slowly emerged, their bodies wrapped tightly in black combat uniforms, but the eyes underneath the goggles revealed complete fervor. Hey! A convoy of Blizzard City lords. With such a heavy escort, it must be something good. Chapter 1463 Extra, Deng Shintong 3. Unlike the other non-submissives, these dozens of people were filled with excitement when they saw Blizzard City's caravan, instead of showing a look of fear. They were not ordinary looters, but the most famous bandit gang in this region, Wandering Souls. An organization composed of mutants, powerful and cunning. Even the people of Blizzard City would have a headache when facing them. A man with a large beard, however, just lightly glanced at the caravan and did not echo the laughter of his companions. The sprites spent so much money to get us out, I wonder what goodies are hidden inside the caravan. He said lightly. At the mention of the sprites, the faces of the surrounding Wandering Souls floated with odd expressions. That was a famous lord in the neighboring region, occupying the area after the end of the world, holding a side of the region with many men. This time they came over, they were commissioned by the sprites to loot a very important thing. Scarface licked his lips and said with a cold smile, "Take the money and do the job. What good stuff is inside, won't we know after we loot it?" The bearded man didn't talk nonsense. He took a black sniper rifle from his back, aimed it at the convoy 3 kilometers away, and directly pulled the trigger. Bang! A gunshot was extraordinarily clear on the empty ice field. The bulletproof tracks of the train surprisingly began to twist and deform under this blow, and then the trajectory was damaged, staggering like a drunkard. Fortunately, the person driving it had good skills and quickly took control of the car, stopping it where it was. Not good, someone is attacking. The guards on both sides of the train escorted the train in the center at the first time. The doors quickly opened, and dozens of Yan Yunwei armed to the teeth came down from the car and began to rely on the body to start counterattacking the Wandering Souls. The Wandering Souls, on the other hand, whistled excitedly and rushed down the snowy mountain. Scarface's face was filled with a fierce smile as he pressed his hands on top of the snow, and in a matter of moments, it swept up the snow that covered the sky. Ice and snow like a tsunami, straight into the sky up to hundreds of meters high, stretching for several kilometers long. The Wandering Souls headed straight for the caravan under the cover of the snow waves. The person in charge of the Yan Yunwei's operation was a vice captain with an ability index of up to 9,000 points. Seeing this scene, his brows instantly wrinkled. It's that gang of lonely souls who are not going to stop. In the first time, he had someone send a call for help to the headquarters, then informed everyone to get ready for battle. This place was too far away from Blizzard City, and it would take 3 days of traveling back from here, and it was clear in his heart that waiting for reinforcements was almost impossible. The only way to kill a bloody path was to rely on himself. The vice captain drew a sharp Edelman metal straight sword, the sharp blade flashing with a bloodthirsty light. He half-crouched behind the body, staring dead on at the incoming wall of snow through the window glass. After 10 seconds or so, the wall of snow came in front of them. Fire! His voice was calm and loud, and dozens of Yenwei raised the black assault rifles in their hands at the same time, firing with full force behind the wall of snow. The muzzles of the guns spewed out tongues of fire, special bullets for use against the mutants, not expensive origin bullets but equally capable of killing and wounding the mutants. Through the thick wall of snow, blood soared out, and some wandering souls that sprinted too quickly were directly shot into a sieve. But in an instant, the blizzard surged wildly, swallowing them completely into the space of chaotic battle. The vice captain held his breath, sensing the presence of everything around him. He named his ability Bloodthirsty Assault, a strengthening mutant with an extremely strong close combat ability and the ability to strengthen his 5 senses when the ability was activated. Closer, the proximity of the wandering souls allowed him to penetrate the roiling snow and ice and see one humanoid after another. The vice captain's tensed legs sprung out like springs in an instant, and the straight sword in his hand aimed at the mutant's head in a lightning-like horizontal slash. His sudden outburst caught the man off guard. A dagger blocked in front of his neck, but the result was that even the man with the dagger was sliced in half by a single sword. The head of that wandering soul flew high into the air, hot blood spilling onto the snow, still steaming white. The voice of the electronic communication sounded low over the communication channels of all Yunwei. Everyone fight around the train, their target is the escort, don't let anyone near the train. Roger that. The Yunwei surrounded the train and began their blockade of the wandering souls. They were well equipped, each of them wearing combat suits created by Deng's technology, so they could be considered armed to the teeth. But no one dared to be careless. On this route, they didn't know how many times they had fought against organizations like Wandering Souls. Among the opponents, there was no lack of powerful mutants, and there were even some former mercenaries. Borrowing the cover of the blizzard, the Wandering Souls killed their way closer and soon generated a fierce fight with the Yunwei. The vice captain blocked the entrance of the train with 1 man and 1 sword, his eyes cold beyond the roiling ice and snow, and the straight sword in his hand was even colder. Puff! Pooh! Pooh! The movements of his sword looked a bit clumsy, his body movements were not obvious, but every single stroke of the sword directly killed a Wandering Souls. The sharp blade was glowing with a ghostly blue supernatural light, easily cutting through their combat suits and blood vessels, causing their bodies to be reduced to 2 halves. Suddenly, another figure approached in the middle of the blizzard. The vice captain's eyes turned cold as he turned around and slashed his sword. Dang! A crisp impact sounded, and in front of him was a huge ice cone. Scarface's face appeared in close proximity, a hideous smile at the corner of his mouth as he teasingly looked at the vice captain. Hey! There was no need for too many words between the two, and a bloody battle was imminent. Scarface was an ice and snow-type supernatural, his arms were covered in dark blue cold ice, slashing at the vice captain like 2 giant swords. The straight sword in the vice captain's hand glowed with a ghostly blue light, and he fiercely clashed with it. Ping-pong-bang! Ice shards flew about. The vice captain's boots stepped on the thick snow, indifferently slashing with his sword, and Scarface's attack was also very vicious. He was from a mercenary background, his combat ability was extremely tough, and every move was aimed at the vice captain's vitals. Ka-ching! As the vice captain slashed down, an ice sword shattered in response, and he sank down with both hands, holding the straight sword perched close to him, and with both hands violently raised the long sword, heading straight for Scarface's chest to slash. Scarface's legs violently stomped on the ground, his entire body retreating like a rabbit, while a large clump of ice blades erupted from under his feet, stabbing at the vice captain. Break! The vice captain regarded it as if it was nothing, his right boot stepped on it fiercely, only to hear a crack. With a sound, the clump of ice blades was directly crushed. Slam! The vice captain dodged and attacked, the person arrived in front of Scarface in an instant. The speed of the reinforced mutant was unimaginably fast, Scarface's right-hand ice sword had already been destroyed, and his reaction speed was a bit too late to resist in the haste. he could only forcefully set up his left arm's ice sword to receive it. The sword was plain and unadorned, slashing down head-on and smashing heavily on his ice sword. Ka-ching! The long sword made of ice and frost cracked with a thick and long crack, and Scarface's entire body was sent flying out. His face finally changed at this moment. Rabid Dog Save Me. Chapter 1464 Extra, Deng Shintong 4. The vice captain was about to make up for Scarface when suddenly, his back tightened and a feeling of being locked in place instantly struck him. In an instant, he sensed the crisis of death. Almost out of instinct, he dodged and rolled towards the side. When he skillfully crouched down to take a good counterattack stance, he saw that the area he had just been in had a hemispherical deep pit appear under his feet as if it had been melted by something. A bad feeling welled up in the vice captain's heart, and he turned his head to look in the direction from which that gaze came, only to see that in a chariot in the distance sat a man with a large beard and a gaze as sharp as a falcon's. Rabid Dog didn't look crazy, instead he was a bit lazy. The battle until now, he was only watching from the sidelines, and had no intention of personally going down. It wasn't until Scarface called for help that he came out with his gun. The black gun in his hand was heavy, not something an ordinary person could use, and if not for a specially trained gunman it would be difficult to manage. The vice captain frowned, his right hand pressed down on the long sword, and his left hand quickly drew the gun from his waist. He pulled out his gun first and also aimed it at Rabid Dog. However, when two shots rang out, half of his shoulder disappeared into thin air, while Rabid Dog continued to sit where he was, unmoving. The vice captain's body slowly collapsed, and he let out a muffled grunt as Scarface from behind quickly rushed over and ran through his chest between swords. Heh! Vice captain of the Yan Yunwei, that's not a small fish. He greedily licked his lips, looking at this delicious origin in front of him, but he didn't dare to lay his hands on it to absorb it. Instead, he glanced at Rabid Dog over there. Rabid Dog just said indifferently, around 9,000 points of mutant origin, don't forget to turn around and exchange it for equivalent supplies for me. Scarface happily nodded his head immediately, good, good, good. I knew you wouldn't see this much. Rabid Dog narrowed his eyes. For him nowadays, how could it be that easy to raise his strength? The death of the vice captain in battle caused the entire Yan Yunwei to begin to become flustered. But the well-trained ones did not mess up, and amongst the ranks, a soldier with the rank of captain soon stepped forward to take over the commanding position and continue fighting. When one person died, a new person would immediately step forward to command behind them. Only, in front of the huge gap in strength, they were only hindered for 5 minutes of time before they were all killed. Scarface looked at the wretched battlefield and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Yo-ho, we really met a tough opponent. 8 of our brothers died this time. I'll have to go to Mr. Sprites and ask for an extra compensation payment when I turn around. Scarface's face had obvious heartache. It wasn't easy to gather these men of his. After all, in the midst of the end times, mutants that could fight weren't that easy to take in. Rabid Dog silently lit a cigarette next to him, and after a burst of gulping down clouds, he said, the combat strength of this escort group is quite extraordinary, so the value of the goods transported in the car must be quite high. When Scarface heard this, a flash of greed flashed through his eyes. Although he was scornful of the sprites, he didn't mind betraying his employer as long as the benefits were large enough. Anyway, in this world nowadays, where was there any honesty and morality to speak of? He immediately said to a burly henchman, "Open the doors." It was a 2-meter-tall enhanced mutant who walked over and tried to directly remove the doors. But the train built by Blizzard City Industries was specially prepared to fight the mutants, and after half a day of busy work, it was not removed. This kind of doors used electronic locks that could only be opened by those who met the identity permissions, so they could only be violently broken down. Seeing this, Rabid Dog pulled out his pistol and gave the car door a shot. A circular crater was melted right out of the car door, and Scarface couldn't wait to rush in, wanting to raid the important supplies transported inside. The wandering souls followed suit and rushed into the middle of the wagon, beginning to scavenge section by section. Rabid Dog followed suit, but they found nothing of value in the carriages. Food, weapons, medicine, nothing. Damn it, why is there nothing? There should be some food at the very least. Obviously there are so many soldiers escorting it, how could it be an empty vehicle? Could it be that this is a return vehicle? The supplies have actually been transported away? The wandering souls were exasperated. Scarface's gaze also became gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "After risking so much and losing 8 of our brothers in battle to loot the train, how could there be nothing?" Just at this time, the shouts of a wandering souls member suddenly came from the distance. "Boss, come see what this is." Scarface and Rabid Dog sniffed and immediately turned their heads to look over. The sound came from the next compartment, and they quickly rushed there, only to see a huge strange metal box right in the middle of the compartment. Several wandering souls surrounded it, looking left and right to see that there were no keyholes, or slits, or anything like that on it to open it. Rabid Dog didn't hesitate to draw his gun when he saw it, but Scarface frowned, "But don't break what's inside." Rabid Dog snorted and laughed, "My shot won't hurt a single strand of hair inside." He fired a decisive shot that literally melted through the outer layer of the crate. After the defense mechanism was destroyed, a white gas suddenly escaped from the gaping hole with a snort. The wandering souls were shocked, and in order to prevent this from being some kind of toxic corrosive gas, they immediately backed away carefully. However, they soon realized that it was not poisonous gas, and the top of the box opened with a click. After the white fog cleared, they slowly approached, and only then did they see clearly what was inside the box. Everyone's face showed a stunned expression. Because that thing was actually a person. A 17 or 18-year-old girl. She had long, dark, thick hair that was so long that it even wrapped the curled-up girl almost up. Facing Scarface and the others, her eyes revealed a bit of fear and doubt among them. Scarface froze for a moment, then pointed at her and said with some disbelief, "The one that the sprites spent so much to make us rob, turns out to be such a girl?" This seemed a bit nonsensical. Rabid Dog, however, stared at her and said seriously, "Perhaps she has some special ability in her." Scarface sniffed and immediately came over, staring dead at the young girl and asked, "Hey, little girl. Tell me, what are you? And why are the scumbags of Blizzard City trying to take you back?" The little girl clutched her knees in some fear at the sight of the vicious Scarface. "My name is Amber. I don't know why they want to capture me." Chapter 1465 Extra, Deng Shintong v. Wandering Souls group of great lords stared at the timid young girl in the box and looked at each other for a time. It didn't occur to them that after all that effort, they would only end up with this. A yellow hair with a lewd smile on his face rubbed his hands together and said, "This girl looks really good, boss. Why don't we have a good time first?" Scarface glanced at her with a sneer. "If she is what we are looking for, do you know how much she is worth? You can't even afford to pay for it with your life if you play badly." The yellow hair's face instantly revealed a look of horror, and he hastily apologized and took a few steps back. Scarface stretched out his right hand and condensed an ice blade, reaching in front of the young girl's snow-white neck and forcing her to raise her head and look at himself. "Hey, you are a mutant, right?" The young girl's eyes swirled with a mesmerizing luster. She opened her lips and was about to say something when a sound of a roaring engine suddenly rang in her ears. The Wandering Souls crowd looked in the direction the sound came from, and Scarface frowned and gestured towards a few of his men at his side. "Go over and see what's going on." Immediately, 3 Wandering Souls jumped out of the carriage, weapons in hand with a fierce grin on their faces as they looked towards the snowy plains in the distance, where a snowy mist surged up and the sound of the engine roaring was getting closer and closer. Shortly afterward, they got a good look at what was a huge silver-gray snow locomotive, with a man with long silver hair sprawled on top of it, winding its way this way. One of the wandering souls stared there, and upon closer inspection, he saw the symbol of his combat uniform. That one is. The sardonic smile on the face of that wandering soul disappeared in an instant, and then turned into horror. This was because he saw the golden three-bladed sword symbol on the silver-haired man's combat uniform. That was the mark belonging to Blizzard City's Heavenly God Squad. The investigation team represented the highest level of combat power in the Jiangnan region, and was the existence that all the unsubordinates feared the most. To them, all of these people were murderous demons. They were even sure who could slaughter a city of unsubordinates with a single squad. Damn, how could an investigation team appear here? Boss, it's the Heavenly God Squad from Blizzard City. The three wandering souls reported the situation to Scarface while not hesitating to directly pull the triggers in their hands, and the bullets turned into three dense lines heading straight for Deng Shintong. Deng Shintong furrowed his brows, although at the moment it was not the object of the mission he needed to perform. This was clearly Blizzard City's special train. He would not be merciful in the face of these looters. Bright salute. White holy light surged out from his body, wrapping up his entire person as well as the motorcycle, and the dense rain of bullets that fell on top of the curtain of light were all bounced away, with none of the bullets being able to get close to him. In the middle of the carriage, Scarface heard the name of Heavenly God Squad and immediately came to the window to look out. Seeing that there was only one person on the other side, he sneered and said, "There's only one person, let's finish him off. The equipment on that guy is worth a lot of money." "Are you sure?" Just at this time, the rabid dog next to him suddenly opened his mouth and said coldly. Scarface looked at Rabid Dog and asked in confusion, "What, are you scared?" Rabid Dog looked at the silver motorcycle that was speeding towards the train and slowly narrowed his eyes. "But if this person coming is the investigation team captain of Blizzard City, do you still want to try and kill him?" Scarface's pupil shrunk violently. "What? How could this be? Could it be that this is their trap?" He froze for just a split second, then roared towards the wandering souls behind him, "What are you still waiting for? Hurry up and drive." Several wandering souls immediately rushed to the cockpit, pushed the driver's body out of the way, and then started the train. Deng Shintong stopped at the scene and first checked to see if anyone else survived. Unfortunately, these wandering souls were too ruthless in their strikes, leaving not a single Yan Yunwei alive. Deng Shintong frowned as he looked at the direction the train had fled in, and instead of rushing to track it, he first initiated a communication to the Blizzard City headquarters. "This is Heavenly God Squad Yang Jian. I've discovered a special situation in the Anhua City area. There was an attack on a Yan Yunwei convoy, with 15 casualties at the scene. A train has been hijacked. Soon, a reply was given over there. Erlang Shen, on board is an important escort. Please make sure to recapture the escort." Deng Shintong thought for a moment and said, "I'm on another mission with a level of A." "So what is the level of this mission?" "The level of this mission is level B. You can judge for yourself whether or not to perform this mission based on the situation." Deng Shintong said, "I understand." He hadn't expected to encounter this kind of accident, but since it was an important escort, it was just a matter of going over there and solving it. Level B missions had some difficulty for him, but it wasn't too much. Deng Shintong looked at the corpses of those Yan Yunwei on the ground and placed his right hand on his chest to salute them. Afterwards, he stomped his foot fiercely towards the ground. Rumble! The earth beneath his feet collapsed, burying the corpses of these Yan Yunwei. Deng Shintong straddled the snow Metro Wolf, and with a blast of the throttle, he chased after the train in the distance. The specialized train had 5 carriages, and although it had done weight reduction, it could only reach a speed of 60 yards per hour at the fastest. There was no way to race against Deng Shintong's snowmobile on the snow. A few minutes later, Deng Shintong chased after him. At the rear of the carriage, several wandering souls held guns in their hands and looked at the chasing Heavenly God Squad captain with some fear. "Ow! They yelled to give themselves courage before pulling the triggers in their hands. All the bullets were blocked by the white curtain of light as Deng Shentong's locomotive roared closer and closer. A reinforced mutant grabbed the steel pillar next to him and demolished it with a single push, then with his right arm drawn to a full bow, he fiercely threw it at Deng Shentong. Deng Shentong's eyes were icy cold. He instantly drew his gun and fired a shot. The bullet wrapped in silver-colored supernatural energy sent the steel bar flying. He then reached out and pressed 2 buttons on the locomotive. The front of the car opened up, revealing a dozen short, thick launching ports from which a dozen miniature flying bullets shot out, heading straight for the rear of the train. Rumble! A dozen or so flying bullets came rushing in. Several mutants' faces suddenly changed. One of them held up a supernatural shield and still wanted to resist. But the low-level mutants couldn't block this specially made high-energy flying bullet. In an instant, 3 mutants along with the entire tail carriage of the train were directly blown up. Deng Shentong's locomotive was close to the train, and he leapt forward, jumping into the middle of the train along the gap in the last carriage. Before his feet could stand firmly, a Wandering Souls member in the carriage swung its fists, and raging flames like long dragons came furiously from the other end of the carriage, heading straight for Deng Shentong's face.